One of the intentions with this video is to demonstrate, again, practice with minimal use of props. But if you're wanting to follow along, you can use as many props or as few as you feel the need for. So maybe have some props at the ready, even I do here with some pillows and some blankets. The yin yoga sequence will include postures such as Sphinx Pose, Eye of the Needle Pose, Half Butterfly Pose, Banana Pose, and a Reclined Twist. Otherwise, we'll reflect on what modern Western psychologists call the true self, the self with the big S, and the little self, the self with the small s, the ego. We'll start the practice in easy pose. Find your easy pose. I'm going to sit cross-legged myself, but if this is not easy for you, then it's not easy pose. So find your version of easy pose, something that's comfortable and accessible, that you can stay in for a few moments while we cultivate our intention, while we find our breath, while we find our inner ground here. So while you're wiggling around and getting settled, feel the things that are touching the floor, the contact that creates stability. This is called finding a sense of rootedness. So feel the parts of your body that are on the floor. Maybe bring your spine to as much of a neutral position as you can. The best way to do that is to grow your spine so it feels nice and long. Maybe the crown of your head is pressing up towards the ceiling. You can roll your shoulders up and back. You can practice a few clearing breaths here. So for a clearing breath, maybe as we inhale, come to a complete inhale and really fill up your torso, not to the point of strain, but where you feel complete and whole, and maybe shrug your shoulders up towards your ears. And then when you exhale, a nice, wonderful release. So shoulders drop. Maybe the exhale comes out of your mouth, and we can do a couple more of these. So when you inhale, feel up nice and full. Maybe really expand and raise your shoulders up towards your ears really far. And then exhale, release everything. So one more of these at your own pace here. So nice, full, complete inhale. And then exhale and release. After your last exhale, soften your jaw and your face. Let your eyes either be closed or maybe just looking down at the floor. Hands, shoulders, arms comfortable. And take these next few normal, natural breaths to connect with what is sometimes known as your inner resource, or what I call your inner ground, that special, unique place inside of you where you're touching base with your true self, the self with the big S. And you can maybe get started by just noticing the gentle waves of your inhales and your exhales, the subtle sensations, physical, mental, emotional, that your body is sending you right now. And if you wish, you can deepen your breath by lengthening it. Not to the point of strain again, but just something that's a little bit longer than your normal breath. So as you inhale, maybe slow the inhale down to increase its duration until you feel full. And then slow the exhale down until you feel empty. And if your nose is clear and it feels acceptable for you to just breathe through your nose, maybe try sealing your lips and continue to just breathe through your nose here. So big, complete inhales, complete exhales. And notice your true being. Make a connection with it. So this goes beyond what you think you are. Just notice what you really are. And just one more breath here. And then we'll begin with the yin sequence, the sequence of long-held postures. The first one will be Sphinx Pose. So for Sphinx Pose, you'll make your way onto your belly. Legs comfortably extended out behind. And then bring your elbows underneath your shoulders, shoulder width apart. And if you're trying to figure out what shoulder width apart is, clasp your elbows with your hands, and that gives you an idea. Now we're trying to bone stack here so that we can release as much muscle in the arms as possible to hold us up. So you might have to readjust your forearms and your elbows to find that place where you really can just kind of let your torso just stack and stay without a lot of desperate muscle engagement in the arms. Once you have found that, you can take Sphinx arms, you can clasp your hands, you can hold your head up. What you're trying to do in the torso is relax your torso. And so that sets up a natural compression in your low back and your sacrum. That's the intention of Sphinx. This is a back bend, and we're trying to get into connective tissue. So the muscle fiber is quiet. Muscle fiber is soft here. But we're not trying to feel pain, we're just trying to feel traction from the compression. So if this is too painful, as if there's too much trauma or injury here, then you can move your elbows forward or place a prop underneath your upper torso to find a better edge here. If you're here in normal Sphinx and you're feeling a little bit, that little bit that you're feeling is a good edge, so you can stay here. This is the first principle that we'll get into. So we're trying to find our edge. This is the first principle. What shape do we need to take in Sphinx? For a few of us, we have such a supple spine that we don't feel anything in normal Sphinx. So if that resembles you, you can try seal. And seal is to extend your arm completely, lock your elbows off, maybe turn your fingers up to the side into a much higher and deeper back bend here. Notice how that is feeling. If that's feeling like too much, it probably means you need to just come into normal Sphinx again. If it's intense but not painful, you can stay there for as long as you want, but you can always remember to come out of a posture when you're done, when your body is telling you you're done with it. Now we'll stay here for a few more minutes in Sphinx. By the way, options for your head: you can hold your head up, you can release and relax your head. Maybe neither one of those feels good. So you need to find a prop, something the height of your head, so that you can lay your head on it. Maybe a pile of books would be a nice idea here. Otherwise, we'll stay and again, to begin any yin practice, we remind ourselves the intention of yin is to exercise connective tissue. We do this through three principles that sound simple, but they're actually kind of complicated here. The first one is called find your edge. You need to find an edge that's appropriate for your unique, diverse body. So the idea is you move your body into a posture, you go to a place where your body finds its range of motion, finds its stopping point, and you start to feel the traction of that posture because the muscles are soft, relaxed, and may be supported if they need support. That's your edge, and our edge is different for each one of us, so you're not trying to look like anyone in particular. You're trying to look like yourself, your true self, and we'll get into that in a moment here. Second principle is you'll want to stay for time. And staying takes an attitude of patience, an attitude of fortitude to stay for a while. There's some exceptions to the staying rule, this rule of stillness. If things become painful, that means you need to adjust the posture, either come out and rest or find a modification that serves you better. Or if you're not feeling anything at all, it maybe means you go into a deeper version of the posture here. So I'm going to stay here for about 1 more minute in this posture. If you're feeling like you've had enough of this posture, give yourself permission to come out of the posture and rest and work out the stagnations. Move slowly. This doesn't have to be a fast-moving practice at all here. The third principle is time. Time is what makes yin yin. Spend a fair amount of time in the postures with muscles relaxed so that we can get into the connective tissue. doesn't really matter what postures you do, as long as you can soften the muscle fiber, let the traction kind of seep into the connective tissue, and stay for some period of time so that the connective tissue can actually feel the postures. So that's yin. That's what makes it different from a faster paced dynamic yang practice that's focusing on muscle fiber. This is focusing on connective tissue fiber here. So maybe 1 or 2 more breaths here in Sphinx, and then if you're still here in Sphinx, then slowly allow yourself to come out, and you can do that by gently lowering yourself down to the ground, and just stay here, lie on your belly for a while. Now you can make a pillow with your hands and just rest your head on your hands. Other things you can do is you can drag one knee up alongside your hip. That's a bit of a hip opener that also relieves tension in the low spine. So for some of us, this might feel good. But after you've been here for a while, you can slowly bring yourself up. And a nice counter to this is a very light back bend. And many of us can get this through child's pose. So for child's pose, you can have the knees together, hips to heels, and then lower your torso gently towards the ground. Arms can be forward or behind you. You pick whatever what feels better. Maybe knees together doesn't feel that great, so you can bring your knees apart and practice your best, your nicest version of child's pose. This is the counter pose. So we're just spending a few moments here just to feel the reverberation after the back bend in Sphinx here. When you feel ready, you'll bring yourself up out of child's pose, and then slowly move yourself onto your back. So the next long-held yin posture will be a posture known as eye of the needle here. So you make your way onto your back. Bend your knees, put your feet on the floor, about hip width apart. The rest of your torso and body is comfortably lying on the floor. So head, shoulders, neck, torso. Feeling comfortable, feeling rooted, feeling accessible here. Maybe you need a prop for your head, a blanket or a pillow here. And then from here, take your left leg. Draw the left leg into your torso. And then take the left knee out wide, place the left ankle on the right thigh. Pause here for a moment and see if you're feeling some traction already. If you are, this might be a good stopping point for your eye of the needle pose here. If you're not feeling anything yet, then the next stage is to slowly draw this right leg into your torso. Now you can clasp your hands behind that right thigh or in front of the right shin. It depends on what your right knee feels about this. If your right knee's okay with your hands on the shin, that can stay there. If it feels better behind the thigh, they can stay there. And if you're feeling something here, you stay here. If you're still not feeling much, you start drawing that right knee in until you feel some pressure somewhere. For some of us, we might feel the pressure starting to generate in that left hip. But not always, we're all different, so we might feel pressure somewhere else. Once you feel pressure, this is where you stop. And this is where we can stay. Oh, this posture has so many different names. I call it eye of the needle, but it has about 6 other names. If you've gotten that leg all the way in and it's bumping up against your torso and you're still not feeling anything, you might want to take a deeper hip opener. And one of the options you have is a pose known as, in yin it's called sleeping swan, but it's more commonly known as pigeon pose. So if you know that pose, I mean, it's like you're saying to yourself, oh yeah, I like that one better than this one. That's an option that you can practice. You can also remember you can use props here. I'm just kind of going here without any props, and we'll stay here. We'll stay here for a couple more minutes, and maybe we'll start talking about a mental concept, because while yoga in our culture is physically looked upon as mainly a physical practice, indeed that's what yin is. Yin is mainly a physical practice. The body is a holistic thing. It's not just physical. It's a convolution of physical, mental, emotional, even subtle energy and spiritual type qualities that are all convoluted and intertangled together. You cannot think and interact with one without interacting with the other. So one of the explorations of yoga is to explore the physical body, which is an aspect of our true self, the self with the big S, but also our mental, emotional body. So it might be useful to begin with a very basic psychological concept. And that very basic modern Western psychological concept is defining the different selves that we refer to when we're talking about ourselves. And the first self is the true self, the real self, the whole self, the self that goes beyond what we think we are and actually encompasses everything that we really are. So psychologists define this as the self with the big S, the self with the capital S. And unfortunately in English, the confusion lies in the fact that we use the same word to describe the true self and the other self that psychologists define as the little self, the self with the little s. And the self with the little s is what I would refer to as the working ego. It's all our superficial mental processes that we need to have to manage our life in the present moment here. So it's a critical part of the true self, but it is not the true self. It's only a component, it's only a fraction of the true self. Unfortunately, a lot of times we fall into the trap of thinking that it's all we are. And it's basically a part here. So just one more breath here on this side of eye of the needle here. And then when you're ready to release, slowly begin to release or slowly come out of pigeon pose here. You can do a few types of exercises just to kind of extend. So the legs were flexed in that posture. Maybe you want to come up into waterfall pose, point and flex the feet a few times. Maybe windshield wipers feel good. So feet go wide apart, maybe mat width, and then bob your knees over to one side, bring them back up to center, bob them over to the other side. Bring them back up. Maybe do this a few times just to work out any pressure that was building in the hip sockets here. And then we'll get ready to do the other side of eye of the needle. So feet come back to the floor, hip width apart. And then this time, take the left leg, or right leg, other leg, bring the right leg in, bring the right knee out to the right and put the right ankle on the left thigh. Adjust a little bit if you need to here. Stay here. This might be enough. If this is enough, just stay. If you need a little bit more oomph, moving by feel here, clasp your hands behind your thigh or in front of your shin, and then start moving that left leg in. Maybe you don't have to move it anywhere. Maybe it's already where you want it, or you start pulling it in until you start feeling some stoppings, feeling some traction or some pressure. And then if you're deciding that this is not enough, maybe it's pigeon pose on this side for you. So here we'll stay for a few more minutes. So there's these two selves that we talk about. The self with the big S, which is who we really are, our complete selves that goes beyond our consciousness. So we really are these beings that are way more than we think we are. The little self, the self with the little s, that's our working ego. That's who we think we are, which is, you can think about the little self as this file cabinet of labels and identities that we give ourselves and use ourselves to maneuver in this modern urban world. You can think of the little self as maybe your driver's license here. It's this card that we carry around in our wallet, in our purse, and maybe occasionally we have to get out to show people what our names are and where we live and other kinds of information about. But if somebody said, well, are you your driver's license? You would probably laugh and say, well, no, I'm way more than this plastic card. And yet, that's what the little self is. Little self is all these labels that we give ourselves. Some examples are some of the labels that we give ourselves. Our name. Our name is a label. It's part of the little self. Our job is a label. Maybe the house or the apartment that we live in. Maybe if we have a vehicle, maybe we think our car defines us, or maybe our bank account or lack of a bank account. These are all these labels or identities. Some become more psychological and obscure. Our beliefs, our lifestyles are part of this little self. These are all parts of the egoic self, the things that we go around and label ourselves. So it really is a bunch of labels and identities. This is the true self, is the little self. The true self is more than this. The true self is all of that and more beyond our conception, beyond our consciousness. And one of the ideas in yoga is to get in touch with the true self. Part of that is getting to know one's physical body better, because there's a lot about our bodies we don't know about, and any kind of practice like this helps us get to know more of our physical state. So just about 3 more breaths on the side here. If that doesn't make sense, then when you're exploring these yoga postures, you find your edge by exploring where your end of range of motion is, and you may not have known that before. So that's new information, which means you just tapped in to a part of your true self. It's like, oh, this is where I stop. Yeah. Welcome to a new aspect of your true self that you may not have noticed before. When you're ready, you can slowly release this posture here and then work out the kinks. Oh, maybe it feels good to extend the legs, or maybe it feels good to do a little bit of yang dynamic movement again. Again, reclined windshield wipers might be a good idea for a while. Or you can just lay here in stillness and notice if there's still some reverberation from those 2 hip openers that we just did here. At some point, bend your knees, roll gently over to one side, bring yourself up to seated. And then from seated, the next yin posture will be half butterfly pose. So for half butterfly, extend both legs out long, bend your left knee and lower your left knee out to the left side. Draw your left heel in slowly until something wants to stop. Now, maybe the heel needs to stop long before it makes it to the hips. Some of us, maybe it makes it to the hips before it needs to stop. For a half butterfly, this is a perfectly good posture. You can stay right here and just enjoy the light hip opener here. For some of us, maybe we want to add a forward fold to this. So for the forward fold, go up tall through your torso, maybe put your hands on the ground and kind of grow your torso long. Look over the lengthened leg, in this case it's the right leg, and then hinge forward until your pelvic bone stops, which might be pretty soon. Soften the rest of your torso and let your spine round. You might have to soften this knee, or even place some kind of prop under this knee. Go to your stopping point, so you're just allowing everything to fold forward and quieting and softening the muscles till everything stops. You might find that you actually need an external prop, something to hold, something so that your muscles can stay soft here. When you find your edge, then we'll stay. Remind yourself that you're finding your stopping point and staying for as long as you want to, which may not be as long as I'm staying, or maybe it's longer. In whatever case, find your edge, find your length in your time here. So in everyday life, we're often talking about the self. Sometimes we talk about the self with the big S. Sometimes we're talking about the self with the little s. And we often get confused about which self we're talking about. Indeed, we confuse ourselves when we're just thinking about what self we're talking about. In a yoga practice, we often hear discussions about a yoga practice being a practice of self-love. This is already confusing, because in yoga, the self that we're using is, of course, the self with the big S. We're trying to tap into this great expansive being that we really are. And we're doing that by discovering new things about our physical self, maybe new things about our mental selves and our emotional selves, maybe even soul energy selves and spiritual selves. This is all part of the greater self, the self with the big S. This is what we mean by self-love. And instead of approaching it from a negative perspective and a critical perspective and a judgmental perspective, we're just trying to honestly understand what's really going on with our true being in the present moment. That's the true self. Oftentimes in normal conversation, though, we're not talking about the true self. Oftentimes we're just talking about the little self. We're talking about the litany, the list of labels and self-identities that we walk around with that do not really describe us completely, but they are the kind of the everyday, in the moment, useful titles that we need to efficiently navigate a complicated culture and social environment. It's like, hi, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a teacher today, which is a label. It might be an accurate label, it might be a useful label, but it is just still a label, and it's just part of our egoic self here. And we have to remember which self we're speaking about here. Well, myself is actually done with this side of butterfly. So if you're done too, plant your hands on the floor. Use the muscles in your arms to slowly bring yourself up if you were folded into a forward fold. Bring this left knee up gently, extend it forward, and then a few bit of motion, some counter pose time to work out the kinks in that side of butterfly. You can do twists. You can do a simple back bend, maybe that feels good here. Otherwise, we'll get started with the other side of half butterfly. So for the other side of half butterfly, legs are extended out. This time it's the other leg that bends. So the right knee bends, lower the right knee out to the right. Draw the right heel in slowly till you find your stopping point. Grow up tall through your torso here. And then gently hinge and release and fold forward any amount here. Decide if you want to stay here. If you're going to stay here for a few minutes. So one thing that it can often happen in this contemplation of the little self versus the big self is someone who's thinking about the little self, the very superficial egoic litany of labels and self-identities, is talking to someone who's talking about the big self. And the person who's talking about the greater self is talking about cultivating self-love. It's like I'm trying to figure out how to love myself, just using the word self, not specifying that it's the greater self that is connected to all things, including things that are external to us. So the greater self might include our relationships with other people, with nature, and with the universe. So there's no clear division between where our self ends and the rest of the universe begins. Therefore, our true self is a complete part of the universe. Another person who thinks that we're just referring to our egoic list of labels and titles and identities and lifestyles and belief systems, they might say, well, aren't you being arrogant and narcissistic? And it's true. If we're just trying to generate love for our labels and identities, that is, in a way, narcissism. That's the definition of narcissism. We're in love with the labels. We're in love with the identities, rather than caring about who we really are. And that's where some critical confusion lies. So when we're thinking, when we're talking, are we talking about the little self, which, by the way, can be very useful? Or are we talking about the greater self? And the greater self does include all things. That makes more sense when we talk in a broad sense about love and about understanding. We're trying to love and understand our greater selves here. So about 5 more breaths on this side of half butterfly. So we're exploring that true, real, greater self by understanding the traction that we're feeling. And if it's traction that's traumatic or harmful, that's maybe not cultivating love for the real self. Maybe we're really wanting to create the label that I gotta have my head touching my knee. And that's an aspect of the little self that might not be so useful here. So maybe just a couple more breaths here. We're ready to come out of this posture. So when you're ready, plant your hands and bring yourself up. Maybe grow your spine long first. And then when you're feeling ready, the right knee comes up, extend the right leg out. Some little motions or counter pose postures. If you're wanting to do something yang here, you can really engage your core. I like to do reverse table myself. I bend my knees, I put my feet on the ground, I root through my hands, and then press my hips up towards the ceiling. This takes muscles, so this is yang, this is not yin. This is just something to do to kind of wake up the core muscles. The next yin posture is called banana pose. The first thing to do here is to maybe just lie on the floor, legs extended, arms extended. Before we do banana pose, let me just rest here for a few breaths and just soften and release here for a moment. A mini shavasana, if you will. So 3 more breaths here. When you're feeling ready to get into banana pose, which is the next yin posture, bring your legs a little bit closer together initially here. So banana pose is a full body lateral bend where we're trying to create traction in either one side of the body or the other side of the body. One trick to banana pose is to try to keep the hips flat on the floor so that more of the traction runs through one or the other side. So if you have a bit of a weight, you could put the weight to remind you to keep your hips flat on the floor to keep them from lifting. Or you can just kind of be aware of how far they're lifting here. So for the first side of banana pose, we'll open up through the left side. So the first thing to do is to walk your extended legs over to the right, as far as they go until they stop and they're stuck. They don't go anymore. So you just inch, 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 and then boom. At some point, they don't go anymore. You can experiment with crossing your heels here. To complete banana pose, you start walking and inching your torso over to the same side, to the right side. So I'm opening up through this side that's away from you here. And I'm trying to create traction, maybe not through my whole body, but at least parts of my body are feeling stopping points here. All the while, I'm trying to keep this left hip from lifting up too far. So that's what I mean by trying to keep the hips flat on the floor here. You can do other things in banana pose. You can extend both arms. You can clasp the left forearm with the right hand to help stretch this whole left shoulder and left arm. If that feels good. Now, if it creates nerve pinching or ligament pinching, maybe do something else with your arms. But if it feels like a nice stretch here, you can include that into your banana pose. Head and neck are comfortable here. So if your head and neck rolled around and got uncomfortably kinked, unkink it by changing the position of your head and your neck. If you're feeling something here, that's all you need to do. And now you need to just stay. If you're not feeling anything, maybe inch yourself a little bit deeper into the posture. If you're feeling too much, if this is getting injurious or traumatic, give yourself permission to back off a little bit. Otherwise, we'll stay here for a few minutes on this side of banana pose. So it's time. Time is what does the work in yin. So once you've found your stopping point, once you've found your edge, you just have to stay for some time. This can make the practice a little bit difficult. It is a nice practice in that it sets one up to notice one's thoughts, because there's nothing else going on, so you're left with your brain. And this is a good time to contemplate things like our thoughts versus our true nature, which goes way beyond our thoughts here. So getting back to this idea of the self with the big S, the capital S, versus the concept of the self with the little s, the small s. One way to look at it is to create a simple logic diagram in one's mind. It's actually a Venn diagram here of sets and subsets and how they relate to each other. You can start out with two sets, two circles. There's a smaller set, which is the little self, the ego, the set of identities. And then there's the bigger self, the bigger set, the bigger bubble. And the little s, the little self, the self with the small s, is a set that lies inside the larger s, in that it is a part of the true self, the big self. It's just not all of the true self. It's just a fractional component of the true self, if you will. So in a simple Venn diagram, it would be the little self is in a little bubble, a little circle. And outside of the little circle, it lies inside the bigger circle that is the true self. So that's the simplest Venn or logic diagram that we can draw. And it should be obvious from that simple drawing that the bigger self is obviously bigger and contains more in it than the little self. We can get a little bit more sophisticated with the true self, in that the true self seems to be limited by the outer circle of that bigger set. But the true self is even more expansive than that. It's connected with everything around it in the entire universe. All the people we know, nature, everything that we interact with, and even things that we don't think we're interacting with, we're connected to. So what you can maybe do is make little spaces in that outer circle of the true self, and maybe some wavy lines that radiate out into the universe, into the world. And those wavy lines in those spaces denote all the connections and all the openness that we have that is actually still a part of our real selves here. So just one more breath here on this side of banana. And then when you're ready, start just slowly inching yourself back to your center line. So legs start inching back towards the center, torso kind of moves back towards center. Stay here for a moment as a counter pose. That was a lateral bend. What feels good for me after a lateral bend is a bit of a forward bend. Now I can do this on my back by just hugging my knees into my chest. When I do that, that pulls my pelvic bone and my sacrum up, and it extends my lumbar spine along the floor. And that feels pretty good to me after after a lateral bend. Something else might feel good for you, so you do that something else here. And then when you're ready, you'll set up for the other side of banana pose. So legs extend out long. Find a nice center line here, kind of reclined mountain pose, if you will. And then start inching your legs over to the left, trying to keep your hips flat and low to the ground here. So they go until they're stuck. I usually say they don't go as far as you want them to go. In other words, they don't go as far as the self with the little s wants them to go. I'm not interested in the little s. I'm interested in knowing my true self, the self with the big S. So I'm going to be happy with wherever my legs go. And then I inch my torso over to the left side. So now I'm making that crescent moon shape to open up through the right side. Maybe I want to get a nice stretch through that right arm. So I lengthen that right arm out here. If I'm not feeling too much, maybe I go a little bit farther, and then at some point muscles soften, and I just decide I'm going to hang out here for a little bit of time. So in these yoga postures, you start to notice things that you may not have recognized as part of your true self. Your breath is a part of your true self. The traction that you're feeling in a particular shape is part of your true self. So on this simple exercise of practicing yoga postures, we get in touch with an aspect of our true self, which is our physical self. And as we stay in these postures for long periods of time, like this yin practice, we can help to notice some of the mental qualities of the posture. Maybe staying here for a long time, we get to feeling really desperate. Or maybe we start feeling really bored. We start adding labels to what we're thinking. And this is part of the little self, the self with the little s. It's like, oh, I'm bored. It's a label. Oh, I'm feeling really desperate. That's a label. Now, maybe it's a useful label. Maybe it's saying that we're hurting ourselves. And that's useful because now we can do something about it. We can come out of the posture and keep from hurting ourselves by doing something else, resting, or something that's a little bit healthier for us here. Otherwise, got another minute and a half here in banana pose, if that's acceptable. Maybe you need to go a little bit deeper here in banana pose. And then notice, and then contemplate your connection with your thoughts, your body, and you can even contemplate some connections you have with the outer world, which is a part of your true self, your relationships with others, your interaction with nature, part of the true self, as opposed to this idea of ego and of thinking and of identities. So 5 more breaths on this side. And then when you're ready to bring yourself back, slowly make your way back to your center line. Work out the kinks here. Maybe it's reclined windshield wipers. Maybe it's waterfall. Maybe it's knees into chest here. You can rock back and forth here. The next yin posture is a reclined twist pose here. So once you work out the kinks of banana pose, this is another pose that's done lying on the back. You can bend both knees, draw both knees into your chest, give both knees a hug here. And then lower both knees over to your right side into a spinal twist. So you're trying to stack this left hip on top of the right hip. Since we want this to be a spinal twist, if your left upper torso has kind of moved up, see if you can melt that back towards the ground. That left shoulder doesn't have to make it to the ground. We're trying to make it there. The left arm can just come out into a T or a cactus arm. The right arm can actually be placed on the left thigh to just create a little bit more traction in the left thigh if that's appropriate. Now if your knees are floating and that's feeling unstable, maybe you can put something underneath it like a pillow to prop the knees here. Otherwise, this is the posture here. Now if you want a complete twist for your spine, you can look towards the extended left arm. But if that doesn't feel good for your neck, you can just keep your head in a nice neutral position. Maybe just gaze up towards the ceiling here. So this is the yin posture. This is where we'll stay. And you just notice here, you notice your true being, yourself with the capital S, by just noticing the subtle physical sensations and maybe the mental and emotional sensations that arise in this spinal twist here. So in our normal everyday lives, we tend to obsess and content ourselves with the workings of the ego, of the little self. And it's important to understand and to notice and become aware of the qualities of our little self, our thinking mind, if you will, our conscious thinking mind. So the little self contains all of that conscious thinking that we do throughout the day to navigate through life. And the true self is all the other stuff that we're maybe just barely aware of, or a lot of it is in our unconscious, but it's much more greater, expansive part of who we are. Nonetheless, the little self predominates, even though it's only a fraction of who we are. It contains, like I said, all of our labels, all of our identities, all of the thinking of who we are, and this includes the more profound things, like our deepest belief, our deepest ideologies, are all there in the little self. Now, one of the misunderstandings and delusions we have about our lives is we believe our beliefs and ideologies expands us. But they're just more labels. And what they actually do is they limit us as to who we truly are. So if you go back to this logic diagram, where you have the little self in the little bubble, in the little circle, and the greater self in the bigger bubble that's around the little bubble, what happens is some of our thinking gets stuck into these ruts. And you can think of that rut as that little circle around the little self. And over time, as that rut gets deeper and more ingrained, it begins to create a barrier between who we think we are, the little self, and who we truly are, the self with the big S. 2 more breaths here in this twist. When you get done with the next breath, maybe use the power of the inhale to bring the knees back up to center. When they get back up to center, you might want to do something to work out the kinks. Maybe straighten out the legs, or do reclined windshield wipers, or bring the knees into the chest. But maybe the best thing that would feel good right now is the other side of the twist, the other half of this twist. So knees come in towards your torso, and then they gently lower over to the left side. Might have to readjust your hips to make them stack better. So the right side of the hip stacking on the left side. The right torso lifts up, lower and melt the right torso back so that you know that you're in your spinal twist, but you're finding your edge for the twist. Again, you can experiment with turning your head away from your knees to make a complete spinal twist. But again, that's hurting. That's not doing you much good. It's not very useful for you, so you can keep your head in a nice neutral position here. And then a few minutes on this side here. So what creates a separation between our little self and the big self is this ring. It's actually the ring that forms the little logic bubble around the little self. And in that ring, we hold our deepest beliefs and our deepest ideologies. And if we allow them to, they create such a fog, such a veil, such a barrier, that it begins to separate our egoic thinking mind from the rest of our true selves and the rest of the universe. This leads to great misunderstanding and to great suffering. And a useful practice is to constantly be aware of that ring, be aware of that barrier, that wall, that bubble, and to undertake practices that begin to kind of wipe away and erode that ring so that we can gaze into the realm of our true self. This is one of the ideas behind a yoga practice, is to take some time to go beyond that ring and to just be with our true selves here. That said, we're about halfway through this twist, or at least I am. You're here and it's starting to feel a little bit too intense, a little bit too desperate or painful. Then give yourself permission to come out. So that was your practice. In a yin practice, time is the fourth dimension. Here, it's the fourth dimension of practice. And if you're wanting to make a yin practice harder, you just spend more time there. If you're wanting to make it more accessible, you may give yourself permission to spend less time in the posture. In this practice, we're practicing for roughly 3 to 3.5 minutes per posture, which is a goodly amount of time. It's enough time to actually get into the physical connective tissue, but not so long that our brains get a little bit too desperate. Our little selves, our selves with the little s, can remain content here. So that said, though, about 3 more breaths on this side. So we're almost done with this twist. Maybe soften the muscle fiber one last time. Maybe just connect with your breath, which is part of the true self. And then when you're feeling ready, bring your knees back up to center. Maybe head, arms come in. You can give your knees a hug here. That was the last long-held yin posture before Shavasana, before resting pose. Maybe one nice hip opener for integration you can practice is happy baby pose. So we can do this in stages. So you can either just hug your knees into your chest, either clasp behind your thighs with your hands or in front of your shins. You can draw your knees to kind of ooze towards each of your armpits. Hands kind of pulling them in here. Maybe this is intense enough of a hip opener. The next stage is to maybe weave your arms in between your knees, clasp your shins, and raise the bottoms of your feet up towards the ceiling. Pull your shins down, or if you can reach the bottoms of your feet with your hands, and then use the muscles in your arms to kind of gently and slowly pull your feet, shins, knees down towards the ground. You can stay here in stillness, or you can gently rock back and forth for a few breaths. Decide how much intensity you want in this final integration posture. And then when you're feeling ready, release your legs, release your feet, and then come into an accessible, comfortable, stable, and secure resting position. It can be this traditional Shavasana posture, which is just lying on your back. If this is not comfortable, if this is a desperate position for you, then you're not going to get any benefit out of this last posture. So find a different position. Maybe gather up props, pillows, and blankets. Find a nice place that feels stable so that your muscle fibers can relax. This is maybe the ultimate yin posture. Here. And then give yourself some time to kind of wiggle around and settle into this final posture. And then begin to soften. Maybe begin with the little self, the self with the little s, which exists up in our brain. So start with the head. Soften your mouth. Release your jaw, relax your tongue, the whole inside of your mouth. Soften the outside of your mouth, soften your nose and your chin. Soften the skin around your left ear, the skin around your right ear, the muscle fiber around your eye sockets. Release your right eye, muscles around your left eye, that space in between your eyes. Soften your forehead and your temples, the crown of your head. Soften your brain, let the neurons be soft, defocused and fuzzy. Oh, there'll still be thoughts there. The little self never really takes a break. It's always in motion are the thoughts. But you can give them permission to just drift. Drift in and drift out. Allow them to be clouds in a clear blue sky. So the clouds are your thoughts, are part of your little self. The clear blue sky is part of your real self, that expansive vastness of space. Give yourself permission to have nowhere to go and nothing to do. Postpone being a human doing, which is yourself with the little s. Grant yourself permission to be a human being. This is the self with the capital S. Just exist and just breathe. Soften down through the rest of your torso. Release your right arm, right palm, right fingers. Left arm, left palm, and left fingers. Bring your attention to the tips of each finger on both hands and see if you can notice a light sense of energy in the tips of each finger. Rib cage is soft, abdomen is released. Soften down through hips, thighs, knees, shins, calves, ankles, heels, soles and tops of your feet. Draw your attention to the tips of your toes and see if you can notice that same light energy, that tingling sensation in the tip of each toe. It can be subtle, clear down there. That's you, it's your life force. It's part of your true self, the self with the big S. Release, relax, and surrender your body-mind 100%. and come back to this notion of checking in with your inner resource, your inner ground, that place, that aspect, that characteristic piece of yourself that is part of your true self, that lies outside of the egoic self. And just notice what that might be and what that feels like for you. You can begin to deepen your breath and start to make little motions. Maybe begin to wiggle fingers and wiggle toes. Maybe start to move hands, you can move feet. Little motions with arms and with legs to bring yourself back. And then when you feel ready, gently bend your knees. Roll over to one side. When you get there, stay there for a moment and remember to thank yourself for your practice, your efforts, your you, the self with the big S, your unique manifestation in this universe. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you are here. And then when you're ready, you can gently press yourself up into a comfortable seat. Easy pose. One last time. Once you're settled there, maybe grow your spine tall so you have lots of room in your torso to breathe. Bring your hands together in front of your heart. I'll end practice with an Om. You can either join in or you can just listen. The inner light in me honors the inner light in you.